Welcome. This is Verbs. Today we're talking about verbs gone wild. That's right. We're talking about when verbs are not acting like verbs in a sentence. So let's take a look. Verbs, when they act like other things that they shouldn't act like in a sentence. The fancy word for this is a verbal. A verbal is when a verb acts like something that it shouldn't in a sentence. There are three different kinds that we will talk about today. We're going to talk about participles, we'll talk about infinitives, and we will talk about gerunds. If you want to know some more information about participles, I do highly recommend my other video on the tenses of verbs because we do talk about participles there as well. All right, but let's start off talking about participles. These are special forms of verb. Our present participle verb will always have our verb with an ing ending, but when it's acting like a participle and as a verbal, it's not going to be acting like the main verb of a sentence. And our past participle is going to have our main verb and then an ending that is usually actually ed, sometimes en, or it could have another ending. But it's going to have, the past participle verb is going to have the ending that it would typically have in the perfect tense. And if you want to check out my video on the tenses of verbs, that might help out. Or if you just happen to be an expert already on the different irregular verbs, then you might already know which one is the best to use. But highly recommend checking that one out for a little bit of extra help. Those are the ways to construct our present participles. Let's talk about how to use those in a sentence if they're being used as verbals and not actually acting like verbs. Participles. Participial phrases, by the way, start with participles. Sometimes we just have the participle by itself. Sometimes we've actually got a whole phrase that's acting together as one unified chunk. Together. We call that a participial phrase. The pronunciation can be a little bit different when you're talking back and forth between participles and participial. Here are a few examples. The ones in purple are in the present participle form. The ones in orange are in the past participle form. Running through the forest, the river careened around trees. Jim, completely drained, crashed in front of the TV. Alex found a $10 bill hiding under the couch cushion. Tony sat alone in the park, abandoned, broken, and ashamed. Dancing, Ricky felt wild and free. The team spirit became invigorated. In these cases, our participles are either acting like adjectives or like adverbs. All right, let's talk next about infinitives. These can get a little bit tricky. We do something really strange in the English language. Our infinitives are actually made up of two different words. This can cause us a problem that we'll talk about at the end of the slide. But we're going to have two and then our main verb. Got to be careful. Sometimes that to can be the start of a prepositional phrase. If to is followed by a noun, to is going to be a preposition. If to is followed like a verb like this formula, then we are talking about an infinitive. Here are some examples. Ryan got to join his brothers. To be or not to be? That is the question that Hamlet asked himself. To boldly go where no man has gone before. That one actually comes from Star Trek. Notice in all of these sentences, except for the last one, are infinitives stuck together. The last one, to boldly go, sticks the word boldly right smack in the middle of the infinitive. Like I said, in other languages, infinitives are typically just one word, so other languages don't have this problem. However, some English nerds get really upset when you stick something in the middle of our infinitives because our infinitives are two different words, and most of us like to keep those together. This does happen a lot, and sometimes rhetorically it just sounds better and it just sounds more thoughtful when you do stick something in the middle. I'm going to say this. As long as you do so carefully and considerately, feel free to split the infinitives. I know that's going to catch me some flack from some other English nerds. That's just my personal stance. Finally, our last verbal that we're going to talk about are the gerunds. Here's the key, though. The other ones that we talked about, those can act like adjectives. They can act like adverbs. Sometimes they act like nouns. Gerunds only act like nouns. That is what's going to make the difference between the verb ing ending from a participle and a gerund. As a gerund, this verb is turning into a noun, and the only way that it can do that is to have that ing ending. Here are a few examples. In the first sentence, painting is the subject of the sentence, so it's obviously a noun. Painting was Joanne's best art form. In our next sentence, our gerund is going to be the direct object. Felix loves swimming. And finally, in our third sentence, writing in this case is going to be once again, a direct object. Greg took his writing very seriously. So in that case, painting, swimming, and writing, although they're all normally verbs, in this case, in each one of these sentences, they're acting like a noun. So that's why we call them gerunds, because we had to come up with some fancy name to say that they're doing something different than what they normally do. This has been Verbs Gone Wild with Mr. Taylor. We've talked about our verbals, particularly participles, infinitives, and gerunds. I hope you've enjoyed. Thanks. Have a great day.